Great, we're recording. So, Russell, great to see you. You are one of the smartest minds, if not the smartest mind in plan giving. So happy to be chatting with you. Wish we were chatting under different circumstances, but how are things in Lubbock?
Sorry about that. Just had a little bit of connection mix up there, but thanks so much for having me. We're happy to be coming from home since they kicked me out of the university. But yeah, it's quite the time. Different things happening at different organizations right now, and everybody trying to adjust in the best way that they can.
Sure. I mentioned earlier before we were recording that New York is sort of a ghost town right now. No cars, very few people outside, no restaurants, no bars. What's happening in West Texas?
So, much the same. I mean, people are, everything's closed down, and fortunately, we're having some good weather now. So I think people are getting outside and enjoying being out. And I, at least for me, our dog is getting much more exercise than she's used to. So, there are some advantages to everybody not only being home, but looking for excuses to occasionally escape being home.
What kind of dog do you have, and what's her name?
Oh, okay. So we have, a very manly dog, a tiny little white Maltipoo that I walk around with a pink leash because I have two daughters,
Mhm.
and so I'm very much outnumbered when it comes to such decisions. But yeah, so she thinks she's enormous and is more than happy to attack any large dogs that we see along the way.
Nice. That's a good spirit to have. Uh, we were talking earlier about how this is sort of the best and worst times for planned giving, which is something that you and I are both really passionate about. What makes it the best and the worst time?
Well, it's certainly the best time we have to raising gifts and wills is that people just don't plan. Nationally, those over 50, most don't have any will or trust documents. So it's the best time because number one, people are planning, and number two, if as nonprofits, if we can be top of the mind while people are planning, we've seen from all sorts of experimental research that makes such a huge difference. So it's really the best time to be top of the mind. Some of the experiments that we've seen with real people going through their estate planning decisions is just asking the question, do you want to leave anything to charity? Well, more than double the share of people who are actually doing that. So it's a good time. Lots of people planning, great time to be top of mind. But it's also the most challenging time to communicate. Now, we know this from experimental research because when you remind people of their mortality, what we call uh, for most people, most of the time, creates a reaction of avoidance. That is, it increases their desire to stay away from those kinds of reminders. And so because of that, people become much more sensitive, become much easier to offend with communications about legacy fundraising at the same time. Now, that's not to say that people aren't going at every headline about the virus because they're wanting to avoid that applying to their own lives, but it is something that changes how people receive these communications. And so it's the best time, but also the most challenging time for communicating about gifts and wills for charities right now.
And so, how would you, or what advice would you give to people who are trying to communicate about planned giving? This is their job. Obviously, as you and I talked about earlier, there's just an incredible surge in estate planning happening right now. I shared that FreeWill is seeing 4 times more planned gifts and wills compared to last March, same time. But what are some tips for folks trying to navigate that sensitivity?
Sure. Well, one of the things to keep in mind, I think, is, and this is a suggestion that I often have, which is if you want a larger audience, don't lead with death.
Mhm.
And I think that becomes much more right now. In other words, we don't want to have communications where we are beginning the conversation with a death-oriented focus. Now, if somebody comes to us and we're responding to a request or an inquiry and they want to talk about estate planning, that's fine. But if we're reaching out to other people, we need to come up with ways where we can have a conversation that doesn't lead with death. Okay, well, to begin with, if we're going to reach out to people, the first thing we want to do is basically just reach out in a sense of friendship. Are you doing okay? How are things? Can we be helpful to you? When we move beyond that, then there's a number of different ways where we can bring up the topic without leading with death. So, for example, one way is to say, I've been with all of these changes in the tax laws, not only at the beginning of the year, but just yesterday, now we've got some new tax laws coming up. I've been helping people to understand ways to give smarter. If you're ever interested in hearing about some of those, I'd be happy to share that with you.
Hmm.
And then notice there's a couple of things that are happening there. If I get permission to share, what
Mhm.
I'm going to do is I'm going to share kind of a combination current giving. There's the new $300 above the line charitable deduction that we have this week. But I'm also going to share some concepts about estate giving. I might say, for example, I've worked with a lot of people that are so nervous about what's going on right now, they've decided that their next gift is just going to be including us in their will. That way they don't have to worry about what's happening with the economy or if they can afford it, that sort of thing. So you notice there's some things that we're doing there. First, we start out by saying, um, this is what I'm sharing with other people. I'm sharing with them about how to give smarter. And then I'm asking for permission. If you're ever interested in that, let me know. And then when I have permission to share more, I still don't lead with death. I mix up current giving tips with estate giving tips. And when we present it in that sort of a mixed packaging framework, we avoid this kind of avoidance response of, why are you talking about death when all around me, that this is very inappropriate, blah, 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 that sort of thing. A mixed bag in that category. Some other ways, if you want to be more direct in terms of mass communication. When you can't ask, then thank. In other words, if somebody has made a gift, if you found out somebody has made a gift that they're willing to share, that just be very, very vocal about really thanks so much to person who has included a gift, and especially if that gift has a little bit of interesting planning in it.
Mm.
They are creating a permanent scholarship fund, or they are, whatever the story might be behind that. So here we're not being offensive because we're not asking for money in your will. We are just thanking, and we're publicly thanking somebody who has done that. So again, it's another way where we're not, look, in normal life, fundraisers are great about being blunt, about asking for what they want, about creating uncomfortable silence. Those are all great things, but not in this space, not right now. We
Mhm.
have to be a little bit oblique with the communications where we need to ask permission first, or we need to thank rather than ask, or take some other strategies where we can communicate. So again, if you're coming out straightforward, and you want to talk about gifts and wills, I would suggest that you mix it up a little bit, that you put it in that package where here's some ideas. Here's what just happened with the tax law. Here's what a lot of people are doing. Many people are including a gift and a will for right now because they're not really sure what's going to happen, and that doesn't cost them anything up front. So you want to mix this up where we're not strongly leading with death, because right now people are being reminded of their mortality. Just we know from experimental research that most people are going to react much more negatively to another strong reminder of death, or a reminder of death that feels like somebody's trying to take advantage of the negative circumstances.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, this was now a year ago. We ran an experiment with a health-focused organization that was, generally a positive message, but we tried two emails. One was, hey, think about making a will and include a bequest. And the other one was, here's 3 different ways to help, and it included that message. And historically, in digital fundraising especially, which is where my career started, you'd always say, only ask for one thing. Don't give people the paradox of choice. But in this case, the 3 options, which we later created a template called the triple option, performed dramatically better than the single ask for, I think, exactly the reasons you stated. So it was really interesting to see that theory play into practice and with actual data behind it. Well, before we...
Yeah, we see that again and again. Oh,
Sure. Russell, I think that you and I are both dealing with the entire world being on the internet right now. So our connection isn't quite as good as it is sometimes.
sorry.
What I was saying is, in a previous experiment with a health organization, we ran an experiment where we tried one, directly ask, hey, consider making a will, and include a bequest. And then we tried a separate experiment that said, here are 3 ways to help, and included a bequest as one option. And in the second email, the results were dramatically better. So it was exactly what you were saying, but it was nice to see the data back up that instinct.
Yes, well,
go ahead.
and I'll just confirm that we have seen that same kind of result in a lot of different circumstances. It's this weird scenario where having more actually works better. And the reason it works better is because if you only have one option, death, you're going to get that avoidance response. But if you have some other options where we're starting out, hey, which of the following ways to support might you consider? Include a check, or include a credit card, or a gift in a will. Or one of the things that we find is effective is to mention to people a gift in a will in honor of a family member who supported this cause. 1 out of 4 people in one of the experiments we ran bumped up interest in a charitable gift in a will just by mentioning that as a possibility. So again, we can use these questions to not lead with death, but also to educate people about some ways that you can include a gift in a will.
That's really smart. And then one thing that we've seen, and I think out of your research, that a lot of development directors don't know about is the impact of planned giving on subsequent years' annual giving or immediate giving. I think right now people might be worried, am I cannibalizing other giving by asking for a planned gift? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I've got some new results coming out on that. They'll be published as part of a law review from the UC Davis Law Review later this year that shows even stronger this idea that once a person includes a charitable gift in a will, their subsequent charitable giving goes up substantially, about 75% on average. Immediately, but we're talking goes up over year after year after year for a long period of time. Now, some of the new results are showing not only that we get this same result, but we did a little bit more of a deep dive, and we found that that is a result that is consistent across a lot of different people. This is not just something driven by 1 or 2 people making really large gifts that changes the averages. This is a consistent sort of behavioral response that follows putting a gift in a will. So for example, a person's probability that they might donate more than $1,000, that goes up. The average amount given goes up. Just across the board, all of the measurements that we see go up. Now the reality is that there are reasons why this makes sense. When a person decides to treat your organization like a family member. And that's what it is when they put your organization in their will. It makes sense that they're going to express that new level of commitment in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways that they'll express that commitment is through increased current giving. And we see that. And by the way, for any sort of technical wonky people in there, some of the new results we've got, we actually control for changes in wealth. And so it's not other factors that are driving this result where people give more after they include charity in a will. So watch for that. That should be out in the next few months.
That's really exciting. And one thing that's interesting is that historically we've talked about this donor pyramid with planned giving at the very top. But what you're saying is that it may actually be inverted. That in some people, their first gift might be a planned gift, or one of their first sort of significant gifts will be a planned gift, and that opens the door to major giving. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just a different animal. It really is. So the idea that you're going to do this pyramid process like we would with major gifts just really doesn't fit. So for example, let me give you one example. If you take two people who are otherwise identical older adults, one of them gives regularly, volunteers regularly, and has grandchildren. The other one never donates a thing, never volunteers, but has no children or grandchildren. That second person is statistically more likely to include a gift to charity than the first. So this is a different set of factors. Now, certainly it is the case that we expect that the prime candidates are going to be those who have been long-term consistent donors, but they don't have to be major donors, right? Things, this is really such a fluid decision. And so to be top of the mind when people are thinking about these decisions and when they're signing those documents, that's going to have a really strong influence. So it's kind of that one of those things where you've always got to be communicating about this because you need to be top of mind at that point of decision. It's
Mm.
not like our regular monthly gifts where people are constantly making this decision. There's only certain points in life when people make this decision. What we find is that when people make this decision, there's two things that drive making these decisions. One is a change in family structure, birth of a first child, birth of a first grandchild, marriage, divorce, widowhood. And the other is this whole set of factors that I like to call death becomes real. So
Mm.
it might be, for example, death of a spouse. It might be negative diagnosis with cancer, heart disease, stroke. It can be any factor. Remind people of their own mortality. In fact, if people are actually approaching the end of life, which we can see retrospectively, that's a strong trigger. And what we're all experiencing right now, death becomes real because that's all the media is talking about all of the time. So these are the things that drive planning. And we don't always know when those things are taking place. Now, we do know right now that this event is taking place, but generally we just have to be communicating all of the time if we want to be top of the mind when people are making those decisions.
Yeah, I remember a conversation you and I had maybe 2.5, 3 years ago now, which was instrumental in the design of FreeWill. And at this point, I think about 17% of people making wills on the site are giving to charity, which is way above the normal average. But it's because you actually just ask about charitable giving during that moment. And it was one of the most surprising things in our early research when we were grad students at Stanford was talking to people who had already made estate plans and how rare it was that anyone was asking them about charitable giving, which was really surprising. We knew that not a lot of people had wills or trusts in the first place, but the people that did have it, the lawyer or the LegalZoom, whatever they were using, never asked about charitable giving, which has a massive reduction in giving, as you know, which was really surprising. And one of the things we need to fix in the country in terms of really increasing charitable giving and increasing planned giving overall.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we know an experiment that was ran with 3,000 people going through their normal estate planning process that just asking the question more than doubles the share of people who include a gift, and it actually had no negative effect on the average gift size. So we're actually seeing a doubling of dollars just from asking the question. So, to the extent that we can do this nationally, you're talking about a massive, massive impact just from asking the question. Now, I mentioned doubling, but of course, if you ask the question using a social norm statement, like many people like to include a gift, now you're actually tripling the share of people who include a gift and you're doubling the average gift size. So when I say this is a fluid decision, those results and many others like it show exactly how fluid it is when you can get a six-fold effect among real people completing their real estate planning documents just by a single sentence, like many people like gift to charities. That shows you how powerful those point of decision suggestions can be. And it would be great the more not only organizations like yours, but the more attorneys that always ask that question as they go through the planning process. Now, look, as an attorney myself, I think it is critical for any attorney to ask that question because, frankly, if somebody wants to include a gift in a will to charity, we've got all sorts of wonderful planning opportunities that open up with that, with complex planning and tax advantages and all of that. But we'll never be able to talk about those if we don't start the process by asking that question when they're completing their will or other estate planning documents.
Russell, you're an attorney. What do you think is holding lawyers back from asking that question more often? Is it just that they're busy and they forget? Is there something else at play? Why is that?
Well, I think everything, I think there are some, if you haven't been educated and you don't know about all of the charitable planning opportunities. I mean, look, this isn't something that's normally covered in law school. Occasionally I do teach it at the law school here at Texas Tech, and there's a handful of other schools, Vanderbilt Law School and a few others that do cover it. But charitable tax planning is not a standard part
Hmm.
of legal education. And so there may be some lack of familiarity that is driving it there. So at least I'm doing whatever I can to not only educate lawyers but encourage them that the way you use all of these great techniques that we have is to start out by asking that question.
Right.
And a lot of times I think lawyers just don't realize how complicated this is for the client.
Mm.
Seems simple for them, but people they're thinking about a lot of things when they go through this process. Like, oh wait, I have that asset that I own in that one place, but it's not here anymore. And I've got, okay, yeah, my kids, and this is my family, and should that person be executor or not? And they're thinking about all of these things. And if they don't get asked the charitable question, it's not that they didn't intend to put it in. It's just that they're juggling all these other things in their mind, and it often gets left out if the question isn't specifically asked.
Yeah, we see, and it's hard because you have organizations that are doing 30 years of stewardship, and then if that lawyer is not asking or if it's not being asked at that moment, then you see a six-fold decrease regardless. The one
Yeah.
other thing that you're probably aware of that we've really seen in our experiments is, and the Sharp group did some great research around this as well, so I'll give them credit here, but around asking for percentage gifts versus asking for cash gifts. And the percentage gifts end up being orders of magnitude larger. And frankly, they're the kinder type of gift because you don't if the state gets really small based on health issues or something else, you don't end up sort of wiping out the kids. But if you can stay standard 5, 10, 15, 20%, that has the opportunity to be a very large gift because most people, I think, underestimate their assets.
Yeah, those are definitely the best kind of gifts for organizations is to start out with that percentage gift. You know, uh, can sound great today, but by the time they actually come into play, very often they're not updated for inflation. And so they end up being dramatically different than what the person originally intended for them to be. So definitely to the extent we can encourage percentage gifts, that's going to be better for the organization and I think more likely to fit what uh, uh, the person is interested in accomplishing. That also brings up a separate issue, which is one of the things that charities often don't do is they don't talk to donors about what they want to accomplish
Mm.
with their gift in a will.
Mhm.
And this is the sort of thing that can dramatically change the size of a charitable gift. A lot of people include a charity in a will as just let's put them in for $500 or let's put a small amount on. If you can talk to a donor about what would you like to accomplish with your gift in a will, now you can start looking at what do you have to offer the donor. Maybe it's a permanent endowed scholarship fund. Maybe it's a particular project or whatever that item might be. Those are the sort of conversations on on the gift in a will if we talk about what is the impact of that gift going to be and what do they want to accomplish with that gift.
Yeah. Let's switch gears for a second because I know that's a great point. A lot of people are thinking, what do I do about stock giving now that the market has been, sharply down and now up a bunch and all over the place generally? You've been a huge proponent of stock giving in the past, but what should someone do in a bear market or in a highly highly fluctuating market?
Sure, sure. Well, it is always a good idea, whenever possible, to give appreciated assets. Now, of course, that's a challenge because not all the assets you hold are going to be appreciated. But here's something that people often don't understand. If you're giving stocks or other kinds of marketable securities, you can actually donate those shares without changing your portfolio. So as long as you have shares or other marketable securities that are still worth more than what you paid for them, okay, they're still appreciated assets, you can actually donate those without changing your portfolio. And the way you do it is, instead of writing that check to charity, you instead give the appreciated assets and you use that cash to buy brand new replacement shares of stock or other marketable securities. Now, because these are appreciated assets that you are transferring, you don't have to wait 30 days. You can do that immediately. There's no wash sale rule. And so the net effect of that is you've transferred the old shares out. You've used the cash to immediately purchase brand new shares of the same stock. So you haven't changed your portfolio at all, but you've wiped out that capital gain. Now, I emphasize this because even if, let's say you bought it for $1, it went to $10, and then it went down to $7, you've still got an appreciated asset. You can give those shares, immediately replace them with shares that you purchased not for $1, but for $7, so the capital gain is gone, but you haven't changed your portfolio at all. So the idea is that even in a down market, as long as you still have some assets that are appreciated, you can still take advantage of those appreciated assets. Now, the flip side of that is we don't ever donate depreciated assets. In other words, if they're worth less than what we paid for them, those assets we never donate. You want to sell those, take the loss because that's a tax benefit, and then you can make your donations afterwards. So sort of the opposite advice if they're actually worth less than what you paid for them. If more than what you paid for them, then the opportunity is there, even if they've gone down in value somewhat.
Right. And I think one thing that's really interesting is your research shows how much more organizations have grown if they're taking appreciated securities. And even if they're not the most appreciated right now, you want to get your donors in the habit of giving those, because invariably, as we have throughout history, we'll come out of this at some point. You'll have more appreciated assets. And if we can use this time and with people a little bit more attention, a little bit more listening to get into the habit of appreciated security giving, that allows a really great habit to form that benefits the donor and the organization.
This is actually so beneficial for charities, and many don't recognize it. And one of the reasons why it's so beneficial for charities is actually psychological. When you can get a person to begin to make donations out of their wealth rather than out of their pocket change, that changes the point of reference. That changes the possible size of future gifts. There's a lot of research that's been done on this. In fact, it was last year that the Nobel Prize in Economics went to a person who came up with this idea of people treating wealth differently depending upon the labels that they put on that wealth. And so the idea here is, if wealth as being donation relevant, that can dramatically transform the kinds of gifts that people will be making. The other thing it does is, whenever a person for the first time realizes, wait, I don't have to pay those capital gains taxes just based on the way that I donate. Once that gets into their mind, now all of a sudden, the next time they have a big capital gain event, I'm selling a major position, what's going to come to mind? The charity is going to come to mind. So it is that change in the reference point, in the mental accounting, that can make a dramatic difference for organizations. If we're just asking for that dollar gift, if we're just asking for cash, my natural tendency is to compare that to the other things I spend my cash on.
Hmm.
bequest to what I spent at Starbucks. But if you ask me for that gift from wealth, from my portfolio, from my real estate, I'm going to naturally compare that gift to my wealth, to my portfolio, to my real estate holdings. And that's going to make that same size gift feel a lot smaller because of that reference point.
That's a great point. And building that Pavlovian response to, okay, capital gain, therefore charitable gift is really interesting and one I haven't thought of. That's a great point. Well, let's wrap up soon because I know you have a lot of work to do. I have two questions for you. One is, these are unprecedented times. What is your overarching message to the planned giving community, to the major giving community, about how to feel, how to act in this moment?
So 2 messages that might seem contradictory, but they're not. Number 1, stay communicating.
Mm-hmm.
This is the critical time. People are decisions. They're completing these online wills. You need to stay communicating, but don't lead with death. So we want to be top of the mind. We want to be helpful. We want to communicate, but we do not want to lead with death. If we're going to talk about gifts and wills, that's great, but we're not going to lead with that. We're going to lead with other things. We're going to be helpful. We're going to talk about other strategies, and we're going to, along the way, toss in the gifts and wills comments.
That's a great point. And my last question is, you've got 2 daughters, you've got a dog. What are you and your family doing to stay sane and happy during this period?
Well, so far things are going well. It's nice outside. We're able to get out a lot, and really just we kind of have our own designated positions in the house. So I think that helps so that we're able to get away when necessary. So far, so good. No complaints.
That's great. I mean, I think some people are seeing this as a real gift, and it's extra family time, it's extra quiet time, and I'm just wishing you and everybody down there all the best. So
Thank you so much.
great to speak with you, and thank you again for everything you're doing.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me.